So thanks for agreeing to talk to us in your home in Wiltshire, Harry, about the music of Olivier Messiaen. And I just wondered if you could tell me what your first experience is of hearing the music of Olivier Messiaen. Can you remember when you first heard it?
It was a performance of Triangular Symphony in the Royal Festival, which Walter Gurr was doing, and I came with his son Sandy Gurr to hear it. And I remember going up, for some reason we went up in the piano lift, which brings you to the level. And what they were doing, it turned out, I didn't know at the time, was the percussion section of the piece. I think it was probably a sectional rehearsal.
It's that kind of gamelan.
Yeah, I'd never really heard of Messiaen or of the music. And in a sort of romantic way, I just sort of thought, you know, that's what I'd like to do.
And how do you explain that Messiaen? I mean, he was clearly very influential on you, but nobody sounds like Messiaen. Your music doesn't sound like Messiaen, or Pierre Boulez's doesn't, or George Benjamin's doesn't. Why do you think he's got that sort of completely individual path?
Well, this is really interesting because he was a composer who defined a manner or a technique of writing music very early on, which he set down in the Quartet for the End of Time. And at the beginning of it, he almost tells you how he wrote it, and what he did in that piece, he did something absolutely unique, of which I don't know if there's any other instance of a composer. That's what he did all his life.
Yeah, exactly.
He never, it hardly proliferated from that, because his music is totally idiosyncratic. You know, it is absolutely, it's also almost mannered in the sense that it's immediately Messiaen, you know, and in a sense it's familiar, and in another way it's totally original as well. But the essence of Messiaen is something completely radical in music, that it is like nothing else, and it's something you can't imitate. It's so specific.
What about the aspect which I feel is there in your music, certainly in some pieces, of big blocks of things put side by side as opposed to kind of...
Well, it's music without transition. That's the essential thing, that it's not, it does something and then does something else, and by the juxtapositions of these materials, so it's never moving somewhere into something else, or moving away from it, or transforming. It is that, and it's that, and then it's something next to it.
Did you actually meet Messiaen?
Sort of, a couple of times. I sat next to him in Paris when they played my Triumph of Time. I think it was Colin Davis, I can't remember. Or maybe it was Boulez. I think it was Boulez, yeah. It must have been Boulez. And they played a piece of his. So
do you have a favourite piece of Messiaen?
The late organ pieces, yeah, very much. And Chronochromy and Et Expecto
So
are my favourite.
Tell me about why.
Other pieces I'd like to have written.
Yeah. Do you ever find that there are parts of it you don't like? That, you know, some people feel Tarangalila's over the top, or it sometimes goes into the border of bad taste.
But I think that you have to accept the whole package. And the question of lyricism is one of the biggest problems in music. You know, how you solve that aspect of it is something that I've been wrestling with for the last 10 or 15 years.
Well, you're a composer who's really interested in painting and visual art. Messiaen, he had a very strong visual sense of his music, but it was a very strange particular thing, which is this idea of seeing sounds as colours. Do you think that's a totally personal thing?
Yeah, it's a very French thing too, isn't it, as well? I think that a lot of it would be purple, wouldn't it, in Messiaen, if it was, yeah.
Orange.
But doesn't he talk about the bird was eternal?
I think also he was, with Birdsong, he was, there was a point where he just needed more material, and that's when he went from, he used to use Birdsong, maybe even in Turangalila, it's quite decorative.
I think that the use of Birdsong, I mean, you were talking about the influence of thing, I think that it was a huge influence on contemporary music. Not just the question of the birdsong itself, but what the sort of invention that came from it and how it was reinvented in instrumental, the actual voice of instrumental music. The whole idea of, if you look at Boulez in the Marteau, or that, the melisma, the quick, and also the flute music of Boulez. In a sense, that is a real influence from Birdsong in Messiaen.
I suppose that's true, yeah, and also even things like even Stockhausen, where you've got almost like constellations of free, jagged melodies, etc. I suppose that you could. It's having heard the Messiaen Birdsong.
I think he was a huge influence.
Yeah.
And the attitude to rhythm, which he really took from Indian music, it was a huge influence.
I mean, there was a side of his music which is very rarely talked about, but it was very theoretical, wasn't it? Because
almost academic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a sort of academic approach. Yeah.
And he was very rigorous about cataloguing all that and writing it down and saying, this is what I do.
And that's what he did. I mean, it is actually there. It is not something through analysis you have to search and find. I mean, when he, but the key piece for this is the Quartet for the End of Time. It's as if he invented his whole world in that piece, and then continued doing that for the rest of his life.